Thank you for joining us this morning for a session on From No Code to Lightning Developer. So let's go. Again, we have a myriad of title slides. Lovely. So I'm Kerry Townsend. I work for Accenture. I am an associate manager, and I work predominantly on the functional side, and I've been working with the platform for approximately a decade.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Keir Bowden. I'm CTO of BrightGen. We're a Platinum Cloud Alliance partner based in the UK. I've been working with the platform for about 8 years, and I've got quite a few certifications, including the big one, the technical architect. So my role in this particular experiment was not to try and teach Kerry to code, because I learned to code like 30-some years ago, so I can't really remember how to learn to code. It was more to just act as an advisor and provide some guidance occasionally, which is kind of going to be my role in this talk as well. So I'm just going to kind of chip in occasionally, and Kerry's going to do most of the work, which is very nice for me.
Thanks, Keir. Okay, so as Keir said, this is very much my journey. So I have a functional background, and I thought it would be a great idea to learn to code, and that it would be a great idea to start with Lightning components. So in terms of this session, it's based around my learning journey. So who will get the most from this particular session? And the short answer to that is people like me. So that would be someone that identifies as an administrator on the platform. You know, you understand the declarative capability of the platform, where the edges are, where you would go to use Apex and Visualforce, but you might not necessarily write it. And also if you're a beginner developer, so you might be new to the platform, but you've never really actually written any code in anger on the platform, and you're looking to understand what the steps are in terms of learning Lightning components and where you can go. So what we're going to cover is, again, my journey to Lightning components. And really, where I get to with this is that I actually complete the Lightning component basics trailhead. So if you've really got a lot further than that, and you really understand everything that you did in that, or if you did it and you understood it, then you may not get as much out of this session. However, there is still a value, which Keir will talk about how learning how other people experience it. So if you are an experienced developer and you're interested to actually help and mentor people moving forward, there will be some key takeaways from here. So the end result is completing the Lightning component basics, understanding it, and then going on to actually write a component of your own. Okay, so our motivation. So from my point of view, it was primarily career-based. So I am a solution architect on a day-to-day basis. I've been working with the platform. I understand where the edges are in terms of the declarative functionality in Apex and Visualforce, and I've been working in combination with developers for years. So I got to the point where I could write a development spec, I would understand where the edges were, I'd have some empathy about what was involved in actually developing that code. And now that we've moved on to Lightning components, the next step for me is to actually understand what's the involvement there, where is it, and to really do that by actually giving it a go myself. You can't buy the practical experience, you can read, but until you've got in and actually used it in anger, then you really haven't really walked the walk. Lightning components really are going to be the future. Again, Apex and Visualforce will be with us for a good number of years, and they're great technologies. But having not started with those, I thought, you know what, I'll just jump straight in. Why not? I'm sure I'll be able to do that. And then from a personal note, I actually work with a lot of people that are developers. I love learning, and I think it's really important when you work with people closely that you have a reasonable understanding of what they do. And I really wanted to develop that empathy. I also wanted to join some of the conversations, which I couldn't usually be part of at the moment. So in terms of some levels of code, I can understand to a certain level, but really getting into the detail and then being able to follow on from those conversations so that the right choices were made and so I could help inform those is really important. And again, credibility. I think in any situation, if you can say that you've actually given something a go, no matter really how far or in advance you've got with it, then it really resonates with the people that you're actually working with.
So my motivations were slightly different. There we go. So basically, the big thing for me is that I'm CTO of a Platinum partner, and we need more developers, just like every other partner in the world, basically, that's developing with Salesforce. We just can't find enough developers. And because of the way we work with Salesforce, not everyone needs to be a 25-year veteran with C# and .NET and Ruby and Python, all those kind of things. There's levels of development. So just having another pool of people that can do lighter touch development, more straightforward Lightning components would be great. So I wanted to find out, I thought Keir had a great idea, and I wanted to find out if it was possible. So is it possible to take someone from that background and get them on the road to development? I also wanted to understand the effort and duration, not just from Kerry's point of view of how much effort she's got to put in, but how much effort I've got to put in to make this happen as well. I want to understand the journey steps. So there's normally a number of ways of approaching these kind of things. So I needed to know if there was a best way, if there was an appropriate way, which I think we've got some understanding of that. I also wanted to determine if it was repeatable, because this one-to-one type thing that we've done up to now is fine, but I would like to scale this out over the wider community. So ideally, admins would be able to help each other, and one developer would be able to mentor more than one admin, that kind of thing. So that was my motivation. Let's see if we can get more developers, if this is a good route to do that, into Force.com.
Okay, so my journey, so my start state. So this is the journey I thought that I was going to go on. So I thought, I've got 10 years on the platform, I understand things, I've got a good declarative understanding, and I've also got a good understanding of Apex and Visualforce. So I thought, it'll be relatively straightforward. I was feeling confident. I thought I'd do some learning, so I'd use the resources that are available. I'd talk to Keir and the people that I know, and then I'd give a presentation. Okay, so just to really add that jeopardy, I thought, I know, let's jump in, let's do a presentation. Oh, not at my local user group. No. I'll do a presentation at Dreamforce. So that's where I started.
Aiming high and shoot for the clouds.
Okay. So my actual journey, as you can imagine, these might be slightly different. Okay, so I attend the meetups, and this time in June last year, there was the launch about Lightning Experience and Lightning. So I went along to those sessions, I did the Trailhead, I got the t-shirts, all those things, and I'm hoping you've all had a similar experience, and I thought, you know what? Definitely want to get on board with this, definitely want to get involved. So I learned about Lightning Experience, and I went through some of the tutorials that we went through on those particular meetups, which talked about the Lightning App Builder. I heard about Lightning components, and I was thinking, shall I learn some Apex and Visualforce? Or, now that this new technology is out, maybe I'll just go straight there. So I've dabbled with the idea of writing, of stepping in and doing some basic level development over the years. And when there have been problems with code, I've gone in and read through it. So the syntaxes look reasonably familiar. I like to think that I can have a reasonable understanding of what might be going on in some relatively basic code. So as a consultant, we have to step into different orgs and understand what's going on. So I'm familiar with having to go in, look at code, and try and understand what it may or may not do. And I've got enough, just like learning a language, that I can sort of get by. So I committed to do a talk. This happened in July. And at this point, there hadn't been a huge amount of learning, apart from I was really enthusiastic. I really wanted to get involved. I jumped in with both feet. I went online. I looked at the resources. I was like, yes, I'm going to be able to do this. There's a wealth of information. We had Trailhead DX, lots and lots of information. Yep, going to really tuck into this. This is going to be great. And then I crashed and burnt. And what I mean by this is that I got online and I looked around and I started watching things on YouTube and I started reading things, and I very quickly became quite overwhelmed. So I would look at a title and I think, oh, no, I'd love to hear this person speak about this. And I'd tuck into those resources and I'd be able to follow for maybe about 2/3 of it. And then we'd get really into the business end and I'd be like, okay, you've lost me. I'm not sure what I'm going to be able to apply out of this.
I think that's fair to say. There's the point of Trailhead isn't to try and teach people to program, it's to try and introduce concepts like Lightning components. So if you don't actually have JavaScript, some knowledge of HTML and CSS, then it's not going to teach you that. It's going to assume you've got a basic, or you're going to be able to go and research that before you get stuck into it. So I think that would be a lot of people's experience who don't know JavaScript would have been to see a lot of unfamiliar terminology.
Yeah. So the challenge is for me, so bearing in mind I'm coming from the background of not having any coding. So the unfamiliar terminology. So there were words, there were a lot of words, and some of them understood, and some of them I could work out what they understood, and some of them I could Google, and then I could understand. But in some cases, there were words, and I would go and Google them, and then I would find that there would just be some more words, which I really just didn't understand. And then, I mean, at the time, it can be quite sort of, a little bit sort of demotivating, because you're like, okay, so I thought I'd spend some time doing this, and now I'm going to have to go and now, oh, I'm not sure. And for me, it was very much like learning a foreign language. So you've got the guidebook. I've learned some basic phrases. I can go to like a train station. I can ask for a ticket. I can apply a certain level. And then actually what I'm doing is I'm going to a family gathering, and everybody is talking in like a regional dialect, and all the conversations are really quick, and I'm like, okay. I'm picking up some things, I can fill the gaps, I can guess, but I'm not really sure that I'm actually learning. I'm just sort of surviving and convincing myself.
And it's one of those things, when you Google these kind of words, when you Google abstraction, encapsulation, the big hits that you're going to get, the popular pages, are going to be written in technical language because they're aimed at technical people who just want a little snippet of information. It's not going to be a tutorial. Every hit you get is not going to be trying to teach you these things. You kind of need to take a different approach to actually find out the basics.
Okay, so also there's a level of prior knowledge that's assumed. So things like the Lightning Component Framework is similar to other frameworks like React and Java. And I was like, okay, I don't know anything about these,
awesome.
So that's not helping me. And other things like, in much the same way as Bootstrap, which I think Keir said to me.
That's one of my favourite phrases, and it never occurs to me that people don't know about the wonder that is Bootstrap.
No idea. Add the attribute tag, like Visualforce, and I'm like, okay, I'm appreciating that for this, you're thinking that probably I know a little bit more about that, but no, in this instance, this is still not working out very well. And create objects, like object-oriented programming languages, and I'm like, I understand that there is such a thing, and I know that Apex is that, and I'm there with the classes and the methods, and I'm trying to instantiate things, but I'm not really sure what of that applies and how that particularly works. So again, the analogy for me on this is if you, as Keir said, if you've ever Googled a medical condition, right? So you've gone online and you thought, I know, I'll do some research on this. You've Googled it, you've been presented with whole loads of options, and you start flicking through them. And some of them are just people's anecdotal information and not necessarily, you know, the piece that they really wanted to focus on.
How I cured myself of.
Something. And then you've got some that are really aimed at the medical professionals. And if you're Googling anything of any, you know, real concern, then going straight into a deep dive on like a medical journal is only going to fill you with fear. So never do that. So I was sort of in this land where I was getting a bit more confused, and it wasn't really helping me move forward. I also have no JavaScript. Now, I've toyed with the idea of learning some JavaScript, and I've been involved in a level of web development. But when it came down to it, I've always found the JavaScript syntax quite difficult. So much to my enthusiasm, this seemed like the time that I really was going to have to learn this. Okay, so the thing about this is that I don't think from this experience I've learned is that I'm not alone. And even people that actually program in JavaScript do find it quite challenging. And some of these quotes suggest that that might be the case.
And that's absolutely true. That's my experience. So I run teams of developers who are currently doing a lot of work in Lightning components, and an awful lot of them, they can write some JavaScript, they understand the syntax of it, but some of them have no idea that you've got exception handling in JavaScript, for instance, because they don't view JavaScript as being kind of that full-featured programming language. They don't realize you can log out information. And it's getting into that mindset, even if you've got a background in programming. You know, JavaScript is just a tricky language to learn. It's different to a lot of others.
Okay, and I'd like to highlight the last one here, which I really feel possibly suggests why this might be challenging.
So this is one of my favourite quotes. So Douglas Crockford, look him up after this. So Douglas Crockford has written a load of JavaScript libraries. He's kind of almost considered to be one of the fathers of JavaScript development. And this is a direct quote from him. The browser is the most hostile software development environment ever imagined. So if you were to sit people down and ask them where they would like to effectively compile, interpret, debug their code, you could probably sit them down to the end of time before they would say Internet Explorer 6 is the appropriate place for me to do that kind of work. So it is difficult, it is challenging. If you're using something like Lightning components, then you can get a syntax error, which suddenly means that your Lightning component doesn't look quite right, but you get a blank page, and then you have to go and look at the console log and see a weird error about malformed JSON and things like that. So that's quite difficult. It's not the most helpful place. It can be tricky to get information about the internal state compared to other languages. And it's just a difficult place to develop. And also you've got loads and loads and loads of different browsers, each of which have loads of different behaviors and different support. And that's kind of one benefit of Lightning components is they're very much targeted at the latest versions of all the browsers, which means the latest versions are starting to get reasonably standardized. So if it works on one, you stand a relatively good chance of it working on another. Not guaranteed. We've got a bug at the moment. Works on Chrome, doesn't work on Firefox. At this moment in time, we have no idea why. And we've got probably 30 years of JavaScript experience between us. Happy days.
Okay, so my journey revised. So I think if there's one key thing that you take away from this is don't give up. If you're looking to actually go on this journey, keep going. And I didn't give up. And some of that might have been because obviously I committed to do a talk. So that was, really at the forefront of my mind. So what I did, I asked the community. So I'm lucky enough to know people like Keir, but I also asked people at work and started to share those experiences with people and got more of an understanding about the fact that actually coming from a no-coding background and then just assuming that everybody else that does code just knows everything. It's just like, oh, well, you can do that, so you just know everything. And then when you talk to people, it's just like they either haven't started this Lightning component journey or they're facing the same sort of challenges, and it's how you go through those. I also go to the dev meetup. And I have been going to the dev meetup now for probably at least a year, but I would definitely encourage you as an admin to go and get involved in that if you're looking to take this journey, generally because everybody is, very friendly and very keen to actually help.
Absolutely. I co-run the London Salesforce developers, and we're more than pleased to see anybody who's got any interest in programming, to be honest. We're very nice people. I'm sure all of your developer groups are very nice people as well, so you should make friends with them.
And even if you can't, even if the topics some of them have the word advanced in them.
But loads of people go to developer meetups and don't listen to the talks. They just go for the networking and the pizza and beer. So, enjoy that if that's your bag.
Yeah, which I think is probably what I may have done. But equally, you may not be lucky enough to actually have a developer group by you. So as I'm sure you've heard while you've been here, the Success Community, Stack Exchange, even if you just go through some of those and actually see the comments and see the sort of challenges that people are having, it will give you confidence that actually there is a body of people out there who are taking the same journey, experiencing the same things, and also there is a wealth of people that are willing to help and pave the way for the people behind them. So I got some reassurance. As I said, I spoke to not only Keir, but people that I've also know or met at the meetup, and they reassured me that, JavaScript is a little bit of a challenge for everyone. I also got a recommendation about Code School. So they do an online JavaScript tutorial, and I did that. And one of the key things that was really great about that is that on the particular road trip is that you have interactive examples. And it's not a case of actually just effectively copying and pasting in some instances. You really do have to pay attention. You have to commit your code. It will tell you whether you're right or wrong. It will give you reasonably useful error messages about what was wrong. And by going through that, it actually gave me quite a lot of confidence and really started to get me into the bug, which is sort of, do I want to keep doing this? Actually, the ability to write some code and then see something happening is actually quite interesting.
And Code School is the thing that will teach you JavaScript. Trailhead won't. You need to know the JavaScript, so Code School is the place to find that out, then move on.
Yeah. So, and then I revisited the Trailhead, but I'd actually sort of developed a bit more confidence, and I think that's another key point. to take with this. Now, they do other journeys, so they do some CSS, HTML as well. Now, I have some familiarity with that code, at least in terms of, the same way that I had with Apex and Visualforce. So I didn't take those. And there are other resources available. So if you go through the Trailhead, the first unit will actually tell you about a JavaScript resource. So it really depends how you want to learn. And that comes down to personal choice. So just to give you an idea, so I went through the Trailhead modules and I did persist. And as Keir said, they aren't targeted specifically at me because I don't have the coding background. And they did take me a little while. And I'd like to draw your attention to the ones at the bottom because, I said I was going to do a presentation, I was going to spend some time learning this, and then I was going to spend some time writing some slides. And actually, it took me a little bit longer than I originally thought. And I mean, Keir's laughing here because...
I'm just thinking it's a good job they weren't 50 steps.
Yeah, I don't know, nobody is more grateful than I am.
Seems like an exponential curve.
Yes, but it was worth persisting. And I have to say that, coming up here and standing in front of a group of peers and saying, do you know what, this took me quite a lot longer than I was hoping, isn't necessarily the most comfortable thing, but I do actually want to share this experience so that if you have something similar, or in fact you do much better than these times, then you can actually feel really good about your experience. So the key takeaway really here is nothing worth doing comes that easy, and I would say that it is worth it, and you will get a great deal of reward from actually persisting.
Okay, so I'm just going to basically give you a quick overview of Lightning Components for those that haven't used them. This isn't to try and explain Lightning Components, try and teach Lightning Components, just to give a bit of context to the slides that Kerry's going to show that actually contain a sample Lightning component. So basically, a Lightning component is a bundle of elements. On the left-hand side, we've got the kind of user interface side of things. So the component contains the markup, contains the HTML, contains some other markup around event handling, and some other markup that helps you persist information in that component. It helps you store information between requests. And then you've got a style aspect to this as well. So that's CSS, but if you're using the Lightning design system, typically you don't need very much of that, if any. Center section there, inside the component bundle, we've got the JavaScript. So the controller and the helper both carry out similar functions. The difference is the controller is the only one the component can talk directly to when a user takes some action or an event is received. And the controller then will typically delegate off to a helper because helpers are more reusable. And there's probably no point in going into any more detail on that. And then a helper or the controller will then be able to talk to an Apex controller, which is how you gain access to your Salesforce data and are able to send that through to the front end. And components can contain other components. So this is an example account and contact edit component. Can you click again? So as you can see here, at the top level there's an app header. So this is one component, it's a component bundle, but much like Visualforce, you can have page block sections that contain fields. We can have a Lightning component that contains other components. So at the top of it, I've got an app header, separate component, could be reused elsewhere. Left-hand side, I've got the contact list. The right-hand side, I've got contact edit, which reacts to someone clicking something on the contact list and pops up an edit component. So basically, they're bundles themselves, and they can also be used like Lego to build out richer components, and they can be reused across components. So if you build a simple component, you can use that in lots of different places. If you want to read a bit more about that, there's a blog link there with a bit more detail about how the code works. So my first Lightning component, which actually includes some code. So as you can imagine, I've followed a similar theme here. So picking my first component, the idea. So when I originally started with this, I was just like, I am going to do this. It's going to be amazing. And Keir politely was like, uh-huh. So I started big, and I thought, I'm going to use some sort of, I have a real-world application for is actually an appointment suggestion function. So what I was thinking there is like, actually, based on some criteria, please serve me up the next available appointment. And I was like, yep, this is exactly what I want to be doing. And then, as you can tell through my journey, it was a little bit more intense than I was expecting. So I simplified that, and I thought, I'll put something in a related list. That'll be much simpler and straightforward. And then
And then maybe I simplified a little bit further. So what I actually have done in this particular instance is created a contact history related list.
And this is really, I would say, this is where Kerry's taken her first step to development, because developers are always really overconfident about what they can build and in how much time they can build it. So as I always tell my developers, I tell everyone, it wasn't just Kerry, start simple, just get something basic working, get the look and feel, and then build out more functionality. Because when you've got something basic, you've got something demonstrable, you can get feedback, then you can iterate on that. If you try and build the whole thing, if you try and boil the ocean, then you can spend an awful lot of time. You put it in front of someone, they go, yeah, it's not really what I wanted, actually. Can you just change everything?
So, start small for early wins, I think is the message here. Okay, so the component that I actually built actually only had 3 elements to it. So we have the Apex controller, the controller, and the components. So from the component side, this specifies which server-side controller we need, and by that I mean the Apex controller. It calls the initiation function. It displays fields, and it also contains the CSS. So this is going to actually be embedded in the contact. Oh, there we go. We've gone back.
So this is basically, this is going to be embedded in the contact record homepage.
Yes.
So this is the UI aspect of it, and then you've got the business logic aspect, which is the other 2 boxes.
Yep. So as we're not going to touch on the Salesforce Lightning Design System very much in this particular session, but you just need to know that it's there. And Keir will come on and explain that a little bit more in a minute. But then on the controller, so this actually includes the initiation function. So in the component, we actually call it, and the controller actually says what it should do. And then it also passes the record ID. So a key thing here to know is that in terms of what you understand from the Trailhead, is that actually passing the record ID is not included. So there are a couple of extra things that I've done which you won't get from the code that was originally there. And that, again, was a really good experience for me to actually make an incremental improvement, find something online, find some information, make that change, and then feel good about actually being able to do that problem solving myself.
And again, that's typically development. Go and find something online, copy it, paste it, and tweak it around, and then claim it as your own work.
So on the Apex controller side, the things that we're doing on the database side is actually pulling the information that's actually in the database so we can actually display it. So the Apex controller only contains a query. Again, I don't have a lot of experience with Apex, so doing something nice and simple, again, was exactly what I needed to be doing at this stage. Okay, so this is the server-side controller, and this is some code. So one of the key things that I wanted to pull out about here is this Aurora enabled, which actually makes this controller available to Lightning components. So that's a key point. Also, in this particular query, you'll notice the where statement at the bottom is where we're specifying the contact ID. So that is what's making it specific to this particular record that's actually being displayed. And if you're not familiar with writing these queries, actually a good place to start is by using the developer workbench. Don't know if anybody's seen that, used that. So in here, it's actually really quite user-friendly. You can see in the selected fields section that as you select those, it actually populates the query. And then when you press the query button, it will actually display the records that you're after. So it allows you to check that your query is 100% working before you put it into your code, and therefore not compounding any issues that you might have later, particularly with something like this. So because this is contact history, first of all, I actually had to go in and turn on the contact history and then work with the records. And understand that there were actually records in there, because it is very easy to sort of go, well, it's not returning anything, the code doesn't work, and actually if you've just fired up a developer org, it's possible that it doesn't have any records in there, and that actually could be a very simple error that you have and can be very simply solved. Okay, so this is the component, and there are 3 main sections here. So the top section actually configures the component, and what we've got here is it's actually specifying what the server-side, the Apex controller's name is. We've got some code here which makes it available in the Lightning app builder. So that's that force app hostile. And then this force has record ID is actually what's passing in the individual record ID of the record that you have. And then in the next section, we're actually specifying the data sources. So we've created an attribute to capture the record ID. We're actually capturing the field history records, and we're also specifying the init function.
So that goes back to what I was saying about the component communicates with the controller. That Aura handler there is an example of where we're saying when the framework raises the initialize event, we want to call an action on the controller, c.do init. So that's the method that will be invoked by this component.
Okay, and then this last section here is just about displaying the fields. So we've got the information, and actually we're displaying the fields actually on the page layout. Now you'll notice, may or may not notice, that there isn't actually any styling in here. So this actually just presents the information to the page. So if I show you what that looks like. Then also in the controller, in this particular instance, because this is really quite simple, then this actually just has the initiation function. And this has a 3-element structure, which again, creating the action, handling the callback, so that's when the server-side controller actually sends the information back, telling it what to do with it, and then the sending action, which is the piece at the bottom. So this is what it actually looked like. So without any of the styling, this is what I was able to achieve, and I was quite pleased with this.
Absolutely. This is what the first iteration of anything should look like. It's not pretty, just get it working, get some information in there. As soon as you see something in there, then you can iterate on that, start styling it, start thinking about what you want to do with it. There's no point spending loads of time styling it only to look at a lovely big fat nothing there, beautifully styled.
Okay, so that is the key takeaway. Okay, so this is what it actually looks like with the styling. Okay, so you'll see it actually looks very familiar to all the other Salesforce-related lists. And this is the styling that's provided by the Salesforce Lightning Design System. So in order to actually take the code that I showed on the screen and actually apply this styling, you would find the piece that you actually wanted on the website. You'd then copy and paste it into the component and then just move the logic around, which is relatively straightforward and obvious, but sometimes it helps to have someone actually just confirm that that's exactly what you should be doing. And then obviously you can see that I've started this, but now I have a framework, but these are the sort of things that I'll now be looking to build out with this particular component. So there are a number of things that I sort of, having not come from a development background, thought that they might already be included. So things like the count. And when you look at this on the screen, it's just like, oh, well, it's got a count of 1. And I was just like, oh, well, that's, the count's already there. But actually, it's not been wired in. So you need to build in the logic to do that. Also, in this particular instance, I'm displaying fields with the API name instead of the label name. So I need to sort that out. Allowing multiple fields. So in this particular instance, because it's field history, you've got fields of multiple type. So in this particular instance, I've got some text fields, but also some of those fields are Boolean. And therefore, because I've specified the type of the output field as text, it's not showing the Boolean. So I need to build in some logic which looks at the field source and then works back from there and actually displays it in the correct type.
So one of the things with Lightning components is that it doesn't actually give you an awful lot of help, unlike Visual Force. So things like needing a count, that's the kind of thing you might expect from Visual Force because it's been around for like 10 years, whatever it's doing a lot for you. Lightning components are very young, so they're very basic, and you're having to kind of build a lot of the functionality yourself. So be prepared for that.
Lovely, and also the view all, which are my next steps. So, and then from that, I'm then going to move back. So I'm going to go back to my original list of the things that I wanted to do, and then I'm going to build up slowly.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about important terminology. I'm just waiting for another mic. Thank you. Yes, that's much better. So some key terminology. I'm not going to go into this in any great detail. The links are in the slide deck. So Salesforce Lightning Design System is what allows your Lightning components to look like the Lightning experience, and it will look exactly like it if you use the right aspects of the Lightning Design System. It's not like it used to be with Salesforce 1 where we're all using bootstrap and approximations and saying, yeah, it doesn't look too far away. This will look exactly like it, and it does look really good. But it's a relatively large framework. There's a bit of a learning curve with it. So go and have a look at that. There's Trailhead for that as well. JavaScript variable scope. You've got a couple of types of scope in JavaScript. It's important to understand the difference because it can bite you. So have a read of the linked article there. Asynchronous processing basically means that a client doesn't wait for a response when it fires off a request somewhere. It just carries on with whatever it's doing. Could be further user interaction, processes the response when it's ready. Loads of stuff in JavaScript is asynchronous, and certainly the communication back to the Apex server is asynchronous, so it's a really important concept to understand. Otherwise, you carry on, you assume you've got a response you haven't, and then you don't know what to do. And then the final one is a key feature of Lightning components, which is attribute binding. So attribute binding allows you to associate your data model with your markup. So it means if you change something in JavaScript, it updates on the UI, and if somebody enters a new value on the UI, that updates in the data model without you having to write any additional code. It's just an expression language, a bit like visual force binding.
Okay, so reflecting on my experience. So now that I've gone through this process, these are the steps that I would actually recommend that you take. So definitely, if you're unfamiliar with JavaScript, actually do some reading or take a course like the ones in Code School. The reason that was particularly good is because they're actually Visio-based, and depending on how you learn, you might find that different resources which will help you.
And that's a really good example of leveraging the community rather than just relying on one person, because I couldn't tell you where to go and learn basic JavaScript because I did that years ago and there was nothing available. So I have no idea how good Code School is, how good other sites are. So go and ask other people who've done that kind of thing relatively recently.
Yeah, familiarise yourself with HTML, SQL and CSS if those are not an area that you particularly know. And then when it comes to the Lightning components basic, if I was doing my time again, I would go up to the module which is input data using forms. So everything that you've seen on the example that I gave, you can get the code for that to do that up until that module. So then by going up to that and then stepping into the example or creating a related list, it actually gives you confidence and gives you experience of like creating something which you can then incrementally move on. So then create something like a related list or something that just queries the server and displays some information, and then go on to complete the Lightning components basic modules. So key advice in terms of mindset. So it could be challenging, but it is worth it. Schedule some time. Avoid deadlines. Unless you thrive in a high-pressure environment, don't necessarily say that you're going to do a presentation on it. And find a buddy, either that can be online or via the meetup groups, and talk to people, particularly at this event. Talk to people in the dev zone, see how they learn, see their experiences, and get some confidence.
Also talk to them about how challenging they find it, because I guarantee you every developer spends a lot of their life struggling with things, becoming despondent, and then suddenly, well, hey, it all works, I'm a genius, and then the next day, I've broken it all, I'm useless. So in the code, again, these are some very basic things that caught me out at various points. So remember to save. Your component will not have approved or changed, or that error message will not have gone away if you've not saved it. Be particularly careful with plurals and case in JavaScript. Absolutely key advice. JavaScript is case sensitive. If you use something it doesn't recognize, JavaScript will very helpfully say, that's fine, I don't recognize it, I won't do anything, but I won't throw an error or anything like that either.
Change one thing at a time.
Yeah, absolutely key. So I find this with JavaScript all the time, that I think I've got a great load of refactoring to do, I'll do it, and suddenly everything stops working, and then I'm unwinding it one at a time to find out which bit I broke. So always baby steps. Yeah.
And then I think this is Keir.
Yes, this is one of my favourite things. I think it's a Google thing. So the 15-minute rule, which means you have to try and solve it on your own for 15 minutes. So don't just go running for help immediately you hit something. Once you've spent 15 minutes, you have to go and ask for help, because otherwise you could waste an awful lot of time. So it's just making sure you put a certain amount of effort in, and then you know to stop. Otherwise you'll just keep banging your head against a brick wall, and you can get, again, very despondent.
Okay, and in terms of the trailhead, remember that actually as you go through that, the trailhead gets refactored. So when you are doing the initial examples and the challenges, where you put the code and the functions is not necessarily where they'll end up. And for me, initially, I found that a little bit confusing, but then moving back and actually doing it at the end, I think if someone had just highlighted that for me, then it would have helped. And again, you need to understand what code goes in which files, because otherwise you won't be able to complete the challenges. And
that's a slightly weird one as well, because it shouldn't really matter, but some of the Trailhead challenges are looking for code in particular files. So maybe that you've picked whichever one of the controller or helper that it's not looking in. So you may even have exactly the right code, it's just in the wrong place.
Yeah. And the last piece of advice is actually the last unit of the code is actually resources and information. So if you wanted to do some additional reading, you could actually jump ahead and actually look at those. So the main takeaway is it is possible. So
Gonna get more developers.
And once you've got the bug, you won't want to stop. And I really am looking forward to actually going back and being able to progress my component further and then moving on to the next step and the next step. It is challenging, it needs a little bit of time, but it is worth it. And another piece of key advice that I've had from people that have trodden the path before is that practice, practice, practice. So there is nothing more important than actually making the changes yourself, making the progression.
Absolutely. You need to be focused on what particular language you're in. So I write a lot of Apex and I write a lot of JavaScript. And now I find that I write JavaScript and Apex and wonder why it won't save, and I put Apex into JavaScript and wonder why that's erroring. So it's helpful if you can focus on that for a particular period of time rather than bouncing around.
Mm-hmm. So I wanted to call out a couple of other people who have helped me on this journey. So Paul, John, who's at the back, and also Dave Carroll, who inspired me to sort of take this route. And thank you. These are some resources. So you've got the Trailhead, which I've linked to here. You've also got a GitHub, which has got the code that I have shown you on here. And also Paul's written a blog, which talks about, describes what is Lightning Components. And he's doing a series on that, which will be helpful.